Hi, I'm Kimberly Washburn, Curator of Education at the Florence County Museum. Welcome to November's Family Day at Home. Today, we're creating woven paintings. We're going to create this mixed media artwork by first creating two paintings, cutting them, and then weaving them together to create this exciting composition. So let's get started. You're going to need to gather a few things from your Family Day at Home kit. You're going to need 2 sheets of 8" by 8" white paper. You're going to need your paint swab and your watercolor strip. You're also going to need to gather a few things from around your house. You're going to need a pencil and a cup of water that you can use for your watercolor painting. And it's also useful to have some paper towels nearby. So the first step is to create 2 identical compositions on your paper. Now this can be anything. You could make these something that is that's something that you see. So you could maybe draw a piece of fruit or a leaf that you find outside. Or you could make it more abstract. My painting was very abstract. So that's the one I'm going to show you how to do today. But there's nothing that says that you can't make this exactly what you want it to be. So our first thing that we're going to do is kind of work out what our composition is going to look like. So I'm going to start just with my pencil and some very, very light pencil lines. I'm not going to press down very hard at all. Some very light pencil lines to sort of decide how these 2 pieces of paper will be identical. So I'm going to make some shapes. I'm going to start out by kind of making a large circle here in the corner that sort of comes off the edge. And then I'm going to make the same shape on my other sheet of paper. If it's not 100% exactly the same, that's fine. This circle is a little bit taller and this one's a little wider, but that's not going to matter. They're about the same. So these 2 match so far. Then I'm going to come down and I'm going to make maybe a smaller circle like this, like a half circle. And I'm going to do the same exact thing on my other paper. Again, if they're not 100% exactly the same, that's just fine. And then I'm going to do maybe one more shape down here at the bottom. So I'm going to just do that right there. And I'm going to do the same exact thing on this one. So these are basically the same. Both compositions are the same. You'll notice that they both have a large circle in the top left-hand corner. They have a smaller circle on the right-hand side. And at the bottom, they have sort of a medium-sized circle. And all of them are coming off of the edge of the paper. So now that I have 2 sheets of paper, 2 compositions that are exactly or very, very similar, almost exactly the same, I'm going to start my painting. Now when I paint, I'm going to make these very different. I'm going to choose 2 different color schemes. Now I'm going to paint the same thing on both of these paintings, but I'm going to use 2 different sets of colors. So the way that I've chosen to divide this is by using warm colors on one of them. Warm colors are colors that remind you of fire. So they're going to be colors like red and orange and yellow. So think about the colors you think of when you think of fire. And those are your warm colors. And on my other paper, I'm going to use cool colors. I like to think that cool colors are the colors that you think of when you think about the ocean or about water. Things like green and blue and even violet can go in the cool color category. So I'm going to be using warm colors on one of my paintings and cool colors on the other one of my paintings. And I'm not going to use any of the colors that I use on one, I'm not going to use on the other. So they're going to be completely different colors. So I'm going to start with my watercolor strip, and I'm just going to start with my warm color scheme here. And I'm going to get my cup of water. This is watercolor. Now to use these watercolor strips, you need to dip your paint swab into the water. I'm going to move that over here. And you need to just kind of put a little bit of water on the paint colors that you're going to use. I know I'm going to use my warm colors, and I like to soften up the paint by just putting a little bit of water on them. That just lets the water kind of soak into the paint, and it helps keep things, keep the paint soft enough to work with. All right, so I've wiped off my paint swab, and I'm going to start with my lightest color. I like to go lightest to darkest because I don't have to wash my brush quite as much. So I'm going to go over to the yellow, and I'm just going to rub my paint swab gently in that paint. And where my lines are, I'm going to create a design. Now remember, whatever design I'm going to choose to create on this painting, I'm going to be using the exact same design on my cool color painting. This is my warm color painting, but I'm going to use the same design on both. And I'm going to create sort of a spiral of little colored lines. So I'm going to kind of create a spiral here. My pencil lines I can go back and erase later. They're kind of a guide for me. So you can use, the lighter your pencil lines, the better. I kind of made mine a little dark here, just so that you all could see them clearly. But I'm going to, I don't want to stick my hand in the paint, so I turn the paper. I'm just going to kind of create that spiral. When I can't see my paint color anymore, I just come back over here, pick up a little more paint. So I'm kind of creating a spiral of lines. Okay, there we go. I think that's enough of the yellow. I might want to add a little bit more out here. There we go. All right, so I started with my lightest color. Now I'm going to move to orange. I can rinse my brush off, but because there's yellow in orange, I don't have to scrub my brush clean. So then I'm going to come back and add some more of those lines in my painting. Remember to turn your painting so you don't stick your hand right in the wet paint. Keep dipping your brush in water. You want your brush to stay nice and wet so that you can pick up the paint without it getting kind of clumpy. And if you do have clumps of paint, just go over it a couple times with your paint swab and those will kind of dissolve. Okay. And I'm just kind of placing lines in that spiral pattern around my painting. Just like that. All right, and last but not least, I'm going to be going over to my red. All right, the red is the darkest of these colors. And see, I can even go outside of my pencil line here to make sure there's enough room to get all my colors in. The pencil lines are just a guide. But remember that whatever design choices you make on your first painting, you need to try to mirror that with your second. You start with your warm colors, you're going to need to try to make your cool color painting look as similar as possible. All right. Now, once I'm happy with the way my painting looks, I can create my second painting. Now, I already have a dry version of both of these, so I'm going to just move these things off the camera here so that you can see what we have. All right, so I have one painting with warm colors and one painting with cool colors, and I actually used my black paint right here just to add some dots to both to kind of unify them, to bring them together. You can choose to do that or not. That's just something that I added later to my painting. But now we are going to work on creating a weaving from these. Now after you paint both of your paintings, you're going to need to allow them to dry. Watercolor can sometimes make your paper pretty wet, and so you may have to let this dry for several hours before you're ready to proceed with the weaving step. Okay, now that your paintings are dry, you've completed your paintings and they're dry, we're ready to go ahead and create a weaving from them. Now you're going to need to get some additional materials together. You're going to need your glue cup from your Family Day at Home kit. You'll want your paint swab nice and clean because we're going to use that in our glue. And if you can find a ruler, that might be helpful. You don't have to have a ruler, it's not required, but it definitely will be helpful in creating your weaving. So I'm going to take my two paintings and I want to have them arranged so that they are the same. So here I have my large circle on the top left-hand side, my smaller circle on the right-hand side, and my medium circle at the bottom. So they're both arranged with the same, in the same direction. So in a weaving, the papers that are going to go up and down are called the warp, and the papers that go side to side are called the weft. And so we need to make a decision. I'm going to use my cool colored painting as my warp, or my papers that go up and down, and I'm going to use my warm colored painting as the weft, or the papers that run side to side. So what I'm going to do is just make a little dot at the top right hand corner of both of these so I don't get confused about what the top is and what the left and right are. Because if they end up turned this way, then when I weave them together, the paintings won't match. So we need to make sure that we know what's the top and what one of the sides is. So I just made a dot in the top right-hand corner of mine. Now, I'm going to set my warm colored paper aside and just start with my cool colored paper. I told you that we wanted our cool colors to be the warp, or the lines going up and down. So I need to make some lines on the back of my paper and do a little bit of cutting. So we have our paper sitting face down. Based on the dot, we know that the top is at the top, which is just what we need. Now I'm going to use my ruler and I'm going to make some lines. Now the first line I'm going to make is going to be across the top, and I'm just going to use the width of my ruler. My ruler is 1 inch, so it's 1 inch wide. So I'm just going to kind of make a line going horizontally side to side across my paper. This is going to be where I stop cutting. So I'm going to be cutting lines on my paper, and when I get to the line that I just made, I'm going to stop cutting. And you'll see that a little more clearly. So the next thing I'm going to do is make some marks every inch on my paper. So I'm laying my ruler horizontally, and I'm going to make a mark at the 1 inch. I lined up my ruler at the edge of my paper. I make a mark at 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches, 6 inches, and 7 inches. And 8 inches is the other edge of my paper, so I don't need a mark there. And I'm going to kind of move down with my ruler and do the same exact thing one more time. So mark at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 inches. So you can see that I have my line across the top, and I've got 2 sets of dots. Now, in order to make perfectly straight lines, we can connect these 2 dots that we made with our ruler, and we can get nice, straight, vertical lines, just like that. So I'm just laying my ruler against the 2 dots I just made, and I'm making a line. Now you'll notice I'm stopping my line right here at this top horizontal line we drew. That's because that's where we're going to stop cutting. Now, if you don't have a ruler handy, you can just kind of eyeball these lines. I wanted to be very precise about my lines to make sure they were all the same. But if you don't have a ruler, you could just use the straight edge of a piece of paper. You could use really anything. Now, I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to cut along the lines of my paper. And I'm going to cut from the bottom all the way up to this top line. And when I get to that top line, I'm going to stop cutting. So, just like this. Cut from the bottom, just on the line that I drew. Now all the lines I made were on the back of my painting, up to that top line, just like that. So my paper strips are still all connected because I'm not cutting them apart at this top edge. You're going to continue to cut all of the lines that you've created, and we'll come back together when I have mine cut. Now I have my entire paper cut. All of my vertical lines are cut, and I stopped cutting when I reached that top line that I drew horizontally across the top of my paper. If I flip over to the front side of my paper, I'll notice that my little dot at the top right-hand corner, I have it positioned so my dot is in the top right-hand side of my paper, or in the top right-hand corner. And all of my lines run up and down on my paper. So this one's ready to go. I'm going to set this to the side, and I'm going to go ahead and grab my warm colored paper. Now I want to arrange it again so that that dot is in the top right-hand corner. Now when we cut our lines on this one, we're not going to cut them up and down. We want to cut strips for the weft. Now remember, I told you the weft are the paper strips that are going to run side to side. So let's get ready to cut those. With my dot in the upper right-hand corner, I'm going to flip my paper over so that the dot is still at the top. I want to make sure it's still up here at the top. It's on the left-hand side now because it's upside down, but it's still up here at the top. And I'm going to, and if it's helpful, you can make a dot on the back side just to kind of help you keep things straight as well. So the dot on the top right-hand corner, on the back is on the top left-hand corner. Now this time I'm going to make some lines that go horizontally. I'm not going to make vertical lines. So I'm going to lay my ruler vertically to make my dots for those straight lines. And again, we're going to make these 1 inch. So I'm going to I have my ruler vertically positioned. It's lined up with the edge of my paper. And I'm going to make a dot at 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inches, 4 inches, 5, 6, and 7. And 8 inches should be the edge of your paper. I'm going to pick one other spot on my paper and do the same thing. 1, 2 inches, 3, 4, a dot at 5 inches, 6, 7, and 8 inches is the edge of my paper. And then I'm going to draw straight lines to connect those dots. And this time I'm going to draw my lines all the way to the edges of the paper. All the way. Now I'm just connecting and laying my ruler on those 2 dots, making a line all the way from one edge of the paper to the other. And these will be horizontal lines. And I'll know that based on the position of my reference dots that I made. So this is kind of a multi-step artwork that might take you a day or two to put together. If it's a lot to do all at one time, maybe you do your painting one day, the next day you draw your lines, and then the next day you do the cutting and weaving. So take it slow in steps to fully complete your artwork. So now I've got all my lines drawn. I went ahead and put my little reference dot back up at the top. I can see the one on the back side as well. It's at the top. And the other thing I'm going to do to make this easy for myself is number each one of these strips of paper. And that's going to be very important because once we cut them apart, we won't remember what order they were in necessarily. So it really helps to do some numbering. So I'm just going to go just down the left-hand side here, and I'm going to number each one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So now each one of my strips is going to have a number on it. And grab your scissors and go ahead and cut along the lines so that you have 8 strips of paper. And the numbers will help you keep that straight. So again, you'll cut from one edge of the paper. It doesn't matter if you start with strip number 1 or strip number 8. The numbers will help you reorder them when you need to. And you're just going to cut it completely apart. So this is a little different from our cool colored paper that we kept connected at the top. These, our weft strips, are going to be cut completely apart. Okay, I have all my strips cut out, and I've laid them out based on number, so numbering 1 through 8, on my paper. And I like to keep it face down so I can see those numbers. That's really going to help me as I'm weaving my final artwork together. So the first thing we're going to do, first thing I want to kind of go over with you is the basic weaving structure. The weaving we're going to be doing today is just simple weaving. It's going over one, under one, over one, under one. And I'm going to show you that very simply and clearly here. Now, to create this artwork, we are going to be using our cool color as our warp, or our up and down or vertical strips, and our warm colors as our weft or horizontal strips. To begin, we're actually going to set our first strip number 1, aside. We're not going to use that one, and I can kind of show you as we're weaving why that is, but we don't need strip number 1. So we're going to start weaving with strip number 2. I have a number 2 on it, so I know exactly what it is, and I'm going to start weaving it into my finished, or I'm going to start weaving it into my warp or into my warm colored painting. Now I know, if I kind of put this back, I know that my dot that I had for reference was on the same side as my numbers. So I know that my number should end up on the same side as this dot. So the number should end up on the right-hand side when I pick it up, if that makes sense. So I'm going to pick up my number 2 strip, set my number 1 aside, and I'm going to go over one strip, over the top of this first one, and underneath the second one. This is number 2. I'm going to go over the third one, under the fourth one, over the fifth one, under the sixth one. I'm just going over and under, over here, under here. And I'm just going to kind of line it up on the edges. So I want to push it as far up as it'll go. It's going to kind of stop where I stopped cutting, and I want to push it up sort of as far as it'll go. Now the reason we did not use strip number 1 is because we didn't cut out that far. You can kind of imagine that if I set strip number 1 on top right here, that's the space that would take up. So that's the reason we're not using that one. So I'm going to go ahead and glue this strip down in place. And I don't need to put a bunch of glue on this. It only takes 2 tiny dots. 1 dot at the start and 1 dot at the finish. So watch me here. I'm going to lift this up and put 1 dot of glue to hold that in place right there. I want to get it kind of pushed up exactly where I want. And then on this side, I'm going to lift up, and where these two connect, I'm just going to put a dot of glue there. That's all the glue I need to hold that strip in place. Okay. Now, we're just going to keep going, doing the same exact thing. The trick to weaving is that even though we're going over, under, we alternate strips. So strip number 3 is going to be the opposite of what I did with strip number 2. So right here, I started by going over. So this time, I'm going to start by going under. I'm going to go under, over, under, over, under, over, under, and over. I'm going to push it all the way up. And you might notice that your paintings are kind of lining up, that the shapes you made are in the same places on both paintings. That's why we kept everything numbered, so we would know how everything would line up together. Okay? Again, you want to push that up so that they're so that your strips are touching, nice and tight. Okay, oh look, my papers got all jumbled here, so it's a good thing that I have them numbered so that I don't get confused on which one is next. I'm going to go to strip number 4, and I'm going to make sure I'm doing the opposite from the one above it. So I went under this first strip, so now I'm going to start over with this one. I'm going to go over, under, over, under, over, under, and it's pretty fast once you get the hang of it. Over and under, push it all the way up to the top, Make sure that it kind of lines up on the edges. You don't want your strip to be hanging over on either edge. You're going to put one dot of glue at the start. Press it down. One dot of glue at the other end. And press it down. And that's in place. And you're going to keep on going the same exact way. Each time you're just going to ask yourself, what's the opposite of the strip before? So this one went over, so this one needs to start under. You're just going to keep on weaving until all of your strips have been woven together. Gluing and weaving and gluing and weaving. Now, the only thing that's different is at the very, very end. So I'm going to keep weaving here. And once I have all my strips together, I'll show you how to finish it off at the end so that your strips don't fall apart. Okay, so I've finished weaving all 7 strips, not 8 because remember we didn't weave our first strip. So we've finished weaving 7 strips into our paper. Now if you take a close look, you might notice that there is the last 8 strip that we wove in, the number 8 strip, kind of hangs over a little bit from the edges, and that's totally fine. That just is the way that the paper goes together. But now we need to secure this one by gluing all of the flaps down. So what I'm going to do is just dip my swab into the glue, and I'm going to just lift up on each one of these little tabs and put a little dot of glue under it. And I'm going to keep kind of pushing up on this 8th strip until you get it glued down. It's a little wiggly and it wants to slip out on you. So make sure you're kind of holding it, put a little dot of glue, push it in there, put a dot of glue, just kind of keep pushing it all together on that last strip. Now, after you've glued the 4 strips that you can see on the front, you need to flip it over onto the back, and you're going to lift the tabs on the back as well. So you need to glue all the end pieces down to hold everything together. If you don't glue it down, it could all slip apart. So it's pretty quick. You should have 4 tabs on the front and 4 on the bottom if you did 1-inch strips, which is what I did. If you have fewer strips or you have more strips, that's totally fine. Just glue all your tabs down. And make sure that while the glue is wet enough, you get everything in position so it's nice and straight. You don't have any gaps. And there is your woven painting. You can see that we still have 3 completely visible circle shapes that we drew on our original composition, that weaving them together really just joined our 2 color schemes but did not alter our overall composition. And this would be true of any 2 sort of identical compositions that you wove together, as long as you're careful about the weaving process. So I hope that you enjoy creating a woven painting. Remember to take it in small steps and display your painting somewhere that everyone can enjoy it. Have a great day.